Good morning, I'm Dave Baldwin. I'm here with Remy, Heskett. We're at our Video Mojo Toastmasters this morning. And today we're doing what's basically a roundtable discussion. It's just there's two of us, and we're going to be talking about the important topic of economic abuse and how it impacts our society. And there's also economic bullying might be another way to think about it. So I want to kind of kick things off and just talk a little bit about what economic abuse is, what financial bullying is, what the impact of that is, who's impacted by it, what there is to be done about it. But a little bit about my background. I am a marketing consultant, and I focus on helping introverted entrepreneurs become more successful in their endeavors by developing strategies that are a natural fit for their personality style. And part of why this topic is so important to me personally is that I found that introverts tend to be targets for bullying at all age levels, starting with childhood, where it's the more stereotypical version where you're being thrown up against a locker in a school setting, which is what most people probably think about. But also there's more subtle forms of bullying that come into play when you're an adult, which is, there's certain things that you can't do in polite society. You can't do those kind of schoolyard tactics, but adults do it economically. And it looks like, in some cases, paying somebody less than they're worth, having a verbally abusive boss, and all those kinds of different things. But Remy, I'd love to hear a little bit about you, like what you've shared a lot of in your past talks about these type of topics, but what do you think is, like when I say economic bullying, what comes to mind for you?
So I'm a financial planner, but I also have a background, a personal story where it was, I had an abusive boyfriend. After doing some research, well after that incident, most people don't leave their abusive spouse because of essentially financial bullying. 98% stay with them because of financial needs. And part of financial bullying to me is when you're, I don't want to say stuck with, but you are financially reliant on someone because they hold the purse or they control all of the money where you have no decisions. And if you, let's say, wanted to break free, you couldn't. And so they're controlling you with money, and that's to me is economical bullying. And as a financial planner, I try to give people the power to have their own economic freedom, whether it's just an individual lady or gentleman, so they understand that they can choose what they want to do. Another side to that is also at work. A lot of times, if you work in a job where it's paycheck to paycheck, you don't feel like you have the economic freedom to move on. And sometimes you feel as if you're not worth something more, and it's realizing that you do have the freedom to choose. So economic bullying comes in multiple facets of life, whether it's that abusive spouse or just an abusive boss that knows that they can get away with maybe paying you less than you're actually worth.
So one of the things I also wanted to address today is there's been a lot of talk over the years about the concept of discrimination, either in the workplace and in other areas, and a lot of times it's talked about in the context of gender-based discrimination or racial discrimination. But one that is particularly a hot button for me is what I call discrimination on the basis of personality type or behavioral discrimination. And the way I define that is that people are often passed over for opportunities, paid less than they're worth because they don't know how to put on a show, or because they don't know how to say the right thing to the right person in the right way, but based on just very superficial types of things. And what I've found is that this discrimination really comes into play when you look at economic bullying or financial abuse, because it seems to me like the perpetrators, like those economic perpetrators as I think of it, tend to single out victims based on looking at, okay, I'm going to find somebody that doesn't know what they're worth or doesn't know how to put on a show. And in an employment type of setting, that can look like hiring somebody and paying them less than they're worth, but also putting them into a position where I can say, all right, I'm gonna make you work long hours, basically just force you to do all kinds of things because I'm just constantly holding the implicit threat that you're going to be fired or something along those lines, versus a healthy workplace as I see it, which is the people are here because they want to be here, because they're driven by something. But specifically what I want to talk about is going back to the issue of discrimination. The question on my mind, I'd love to hear some thoughts from you, Remy, is do you think that it's possible that what sometimes appears to be discrimination on the basis of gender or race might actually be either personality or behaviorally based discrimination?
That's a great question. And that's hard to really say when, we're thinking about different motives. I know there's been a lot of studies out there, we have, we don't intentionally try to have a bias, but just when you put in a resume, when they look at your name, they're already having an internal bias. They had a study a few years ago, actually, probably last year, and it was a very exact same resume, exact same format, looked exactly the same, and one name was Jose and one name was Joe. So they literally took out the S. One letter, Joe got 10 times more calls than Jose. So I don't think there's an intentional thing when it comes to bias. It's just something that either we've grown up with as a society and we don't even realize it's open to. But I definitely think there's some underlying layer that says, I grew up this way, this is how I know things to be, and that's how we make our decisions. Whether that's my mom was always in the house and my dad never let her do something, and then that kind of feeds over to when you're talking about hiring or when you're talking about employing someone that maybe looks like your mom. You're like, she should be at home, maybe she doesn't need to have this kind of responsibility. It's not intentional, but that's the way people grow up. So it's really hard to say, for me, where it comes from.
Yeah, I think it definitely is, to some extent, inherently gender-based or inherently racial. I think there's no getting around that. I think there's really no hard and fast answer like you're saying. And I think the real question comes down to what do we really need to do about it? What does the solution look like? And personally, I think that it has to, you can, if I go back to the schoolyard bullying example, the one thing you don't ever do with a bully is go tell the teacher, because that's going to make your life a lot worse very quickly, as every kid finds out, usually without too much time going by. But I think that the solution comes down to, well, you have to learn how to stand up to the bully in the schoolyard. And in an economic sense, as an adult, you have to learn the strategies for the standing up to the bully. Or I think it kind of looks differently, but it has to start with the individual. It has to come from the ground up. But the question is, do you agree or disagree with that statement, or do you think that the solution needs to come from somewhere else?
Well, I think if we're talking about where do we start, it's hard to change the bully mindset. So what can you control is what I always look for.
Yes.
And the things that you can control is yourself. So what can you do to improve yourself, empower yourself, or how do we help empower others to stand up, or at least see the signs, and what can they do to empower their voices? And I think the biggest thing is empowering their voices. What do they say? What can they say that's not aggressive or can be overpowering, but does set a firm tone that says, here's who I am, here's what I know I'm worth when we're talking about economical bullying, and this is what steps I'm talking about. And how do you give yourself and help others empower themselves to have a voice?
Okay. Now, the other question that comes to mind is, kind of extending from this, how could we potentially do a better job with educating the youth to address this type of issue from as young an age as possible? And to me, a lot of it comes back to formal education, but it also comes back to the family, and also the community also plays a role. But there's, I think, a lot of fundamental lessons that young people are not being taught. I personally was not taught growing up. I had to go just figure out for myself later on in life. And I think one of those fundamental lessons is learning how to negotiate, learning how to effectively ask for what you want, and be able to put yourself in a position where somebody can't just blow you off. Or basically, how do you position yourself where you have a defensive strategy, that you're not an easy target for a bully? I think that really needs to be part of every young child's education. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, if we're talking about an overall, like, how do we reach the youth, I think the first thing is to meet where they're already there. And I think the biggest thing is online right now. It's easy to get to, as well as what type of media do they kind of consume. One of it's going to be video, and the other one's going to be social media. And how do you utilize those platforms and speak not just at them, but to them, so they get it. Give them examples of, here's a situation that they know right now, so that they can build on that later. And I think if we utilize those platforms to actually get to them, I think that's going to help a lot. And then break it down to those, what are the specific things we would want to talk about. Negotiation, when we're talking about negotiation, what are we talking about? Not just money, maybe we're talking about, a better life balance, work life, school life balance. All little things just to step them up, but utilize the media that they're currently delivering or consuming so we can deliver the message to them.
Well, that's great. It looks like that's about all the time we have for this particular interview. Obviously, it's a very rich topic that we could talk about a lot longer. But thanks for everybody tuning in here, and we'll surely be more about this coming later.
10 minutes and 39.7 seconds.